We get it. You can't peel back your eyelids without seeing something about COVID-19. It's a strange time to be alive, surreal like the first moments waking from a night of a fevered dream. Though most of us are witnessing this from our homes via squares and rectangles of light in places of relative safety, and those who do contract the virus sweat it out in their beds. Imagine getting sick in a bloody, pissy trench. Imagine coughing up your lungs and emptying your bowels in the sand while shells soar overhead and your friends are blown to bits around you. War is hell, but being sick in war must be its deepest circle. In this video, we're jumping on the COVID train, but rather than riding it into uncertainty and despair, we'll be shifting the tracks and sending it back through time to World War II, stopping to check out a range of fun diseases suffered by military personnel in that dreadful time. Face masks on, people, and don't forget to wash your hands after. Before we go into specific diseases, it's important to understand why the soldiers of World War II were prone to them. Disease obviously spreads quicker when large numbers of people are gathered in one place, such as they all were throughout the war. Poor hygiene plays no small role in spreading diseases either, and soldiers rarely had access to proper sanitation. Diseases take hold when our bodies are under stress, and stressors like hunger, starvation, and malnutrition, exposure to the elements such as wind, rain, and snow, a lack of sleep, and just general fatigue were prevalent in all stages of war, and even just the stress of being at war may have been enough to wear someone down. I know right now, as we tunnel into the shadow of a hostile future, I'm pressed down by a weight I can't describe. It's a feeling in the air, the zeitgeist, and it's about as contagious as the virus itself. Just imagine how people would have felt with World War II looming over their heads, and imagine how that would have pressed down upon them and weakened their bodies to disease and other sufferings. Another major factor contributing to the spread of disease in the war was the mass movement of troops into new territories, in which both the natives and occupiers were at risk of contracting foreign diseases and transporting them elsewhere en masse. This, as you'll come to see, was particularly devastating for foreign troops operating in tropical environments. Even just the movement of young men from different parts of a country or even other countries brought into the armed forces completely new diseases. And finally, we can't forget biological warfare, in which militaries concocted ways to spread disease through the ranks of their enemies, killing them from the inside out. Dysentery is a form of gastroenteritis, often, but not always, caused by a bacterial infection. In World War II, soldiers contracted it from bacteria in dirty water, and while some were supplied with purification tools such as halazone tablets and chlorine, these were not always available and not always effective. The more discreet symptoms include fever, abdominal pain, and a feeling that you, well, haven't finished shitting. By far the most terrifying symptom of dysentery is the hot, bloody diarrhea, which could lead to dehydration and, if it went on for too long, death. British soldier James A. McCall described how his unit was tested for dysentery. They came along with a glass rod. You bent over and they stuck the rod up your behind. If there was blood on it, you had dysentery. If there was no blood, you didn't have dysentery. That was the medical exam. Another fun bacterial disease which also spreads through dirty water is cholera. While the intensity of the symptoms varies, watery diarrhea is what a soldier whose small intestine was infected with cholera-causing microorganisms could expect, and severe dehydration may have followed. Ken Adams, a British medic made POW by the Japanese, described a man with cholera. The day at last arrived that we had all been dreading and hoped we might escape. Someone was brought into the camp by truck with cholera. He had severe stomach pains, his legs were cramping, and he was gushing so-called milk stools. Thin, whitish material that, I understand, is part of the lining of the intestines being stripped away by the disease. Hepatitis is liver inflammation, and while it may be the result of one of the hepatitis viruses, it may also be a result of alcohol abuse, toxins, and other infections. In World War II, soldiers contracted hepatitis A through contaminated food and water, and hepatitis B from infected yellow fever vaccines. Of the 330,000 soldiers given yellow fever vaccines, 50,000 became sick. The symptoms are fairly mild if the hepatitis is acute, meaning it resolves within 6 months, and such include discoloration of the skin and eyes, tiredness, vomiting, and diarrhea. If it is chronic, however, meaning it lasts longer than 6 months, it can result in liver failure. Malaria was a massive problem during World War II, though both the Allied and Axis troops fighting in the jungles of the South Pacific Theatre suffered it most. Malaria is an infectious disease carried by mosquitoes, and mosquitoes just love the jungle, and more than that, sucking human blood. The disease itself is a parasite which travels to the liver, where it matures and reproduces, and its symptoms include tiredness, headaches, fever, vomiting, and if it's really bad, yellowing of the skin, seizures, coma, and even death. It was thus a deciding factor in war, and to put it into perspective, around 60,000 US troops died of malaria in the South Pacific Theatre and Africa combined, while some 470,000 contracted it. Preventative measures included insect repellents, mosquito nets, careful selection of base sites, and quinine tablets were used to treat it, though they had some nasty side effects in themselves. British soldier Frederick Weidman described what it was like getting malaria in Burma. I felt weak and sick. My surroundings began to recede and become more and more unreal. I passed out and was picked up off the floor. My next recollection was of waking up on a stretcher in an ambulance bumping along a track full of potholes. "What hit me?" I asked. "Nothing," I was told. "You just keeled over. You've got a dose of malaria." Another mosquito-borne disease, dengue fever, caused by the dengue virus, was also suffered by many soldiers in World War II. On top of the headache, fever, and vomiting associated with malaria, dengue fever also caused severe muscle and joint pains and a skin rash. Some even refer to the virus as breakbone fever, indicating just how severe those muscle and joint pains could be, and some 90,000 US troops contracted it during the war. USMC radioman Perry Pollins wrote, "With diarrhea and my bodily functions disabled, I'm in tremendous pain and my inability to move makes me want to die. I still have a high fever and shivering. The poncho is wrapped tightly round me, and though freezing, I'm soaked with perspiration." Mosquitoes aren't the only insect which carry diseases, however. Mites carrying the parasite which caused scrub or bush typhus were another concern for the soldiers of the Second World War. Up to 12 days after being bitten by a carrier mite, the area around the bite turns into a pink-red lesion, and then the unfortunate infectee would suffer headaches, chills, a fever, and swollen glands. A week after that, they develop a rash which could last up to a month. In the long run, typhus could influence heart function and cause circulatory failure. Typhus spread especially quick through ghettos, prisons, and labor and concentration camps, killing millions of POWs throughout the war. The Nazi concentration camp Bergen-Belson, for instance, was burnt to the ground by the Allies because it was so infested with typhus. Around 7,000 US troops contracted typhus during the war. We've covered mosquitoes and mites, but sandflies can also carry another particularly nasty disease, leishmaniasis, which is caused by the leishmania parasites. While there are different forms of the disease, all results in ulcers, mostly of the skin. Soldiers could prevent it the same way they could prevent malaria, with nets and repellents and such, and it was a particular problem for the Allied troops in Sicily during the war. Tuberculosis is a little more classic in that it isn't carried by insects, but passed rather through coughing, spitting, and sneezing. TB is a bacterial infection, and its symptoms include a chronic cough, bloody mucus, fever, and weight loss. It can spread to other organs, causing a range of other problems, and kill if left untreated. TB was an epidemic during the Second World War, exacerbated very much by overcrowding and weakened immune systems. Venereal diseases such as gonorrhea and syphilis were also prevalent throughout the war, as many soldiers had multiple sexual partners in foreign countries their militaries were passing through or occupying, often doing it without protection. This became a massive concern for the US military in particular, whose venereal disease propaganda was unrivaled. To put it in perspective, more than 880,000 US troops contracted a venereal disease during the war. So, those are just 9 diseases which were prevalent in World War II, whereas, in reality, soldiers suffered a plethora more and often more than one at a time. It's easy to imagine some of these symptoms in isolation, but you can't forget that the soldiers who contracted them were often out in the field, where treatment was scarce and enemies were everywhere. It truly would have been the deepest circle of hell, and I'm sure many of the soldiers who contracted these diseases would have welcomed a bullet. Though, what do you think? Can you think of any other diseases suffered by the soldiers of World War II? Have you got any specific examples of soldiers suffering diseases in World War II? Please share your thoughts down in the comments section below, and please stay healthy and safe in these uncertain times. And guys, just before you go, if you want a deeper look into every video we make here on the front, we have a Discord channel where we post all of our video links. In addition to that, you can interact with other members of the community interested in history as well, so make sure you check that out. And if you want to support the channel more than already are by watching this video, please do check out the Patreon as well. It really does help with our production quality. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.